शिरोदिनि वासिनि विष्णुविलासिनि जिष्णुनुते भगवति हेशिति कण्ठकुटुम्बिनि भूरि कुटुम्बिनि भूरि कृते जय जय हे महिषासुरमर्दिनि रम्यकपर्दिनि शैलसुते सुरवरवर्षिणि दुर्धरदर्शिनि दुर्मुखमर्षिनि हर्षरते त्रिभुवनपोषिणि शङ्करतोषिणि किल्बिषमोषिनि घोषरते धनुजनि रोषिनि दितिश्रुतरोषिनि दुर्मथतोषिनि सिन्धुसुते जय जय हे महिषासुरमर्दिनि रम्यकपर्दिनि शैलसुते जय जय हे महिषासुरमर्दिनि रम्यकपर्दिनि शैलसुते जय जय हे महिषासुरमर्दिनि रम्यकपर्दिनि शैलसुते
Hi guys, thank you for joining the live stream. Let me know if the audio is coming fine. Yeah, the audio seems to be fine. Thank you for joining at this odd hour today. Hi, M. Shastri, Hindu Vichardhara Didi, Navavimarsh, Divya, Shekhar. So, two things before I start the live stream. First is, I have not gone through the paper. Like all our paper discussions are basically live reactions only that I read them for the very first time along with you guys. So I get surprised, I get disappointed all for the very first time. The only paper I have ever read beforehand before doing the live stream was Irfan Habib's paper, because I was curious why was Mystery Sociologist suggesting this paper so much. So I thought, let's just go through it, check it out first. Then I lost my sleep that night and I had to go on underlining and taking screenshots of almost every line in that paper. That was, of course, a groundbreaking paper. Now, today's paper, I have read the first 4 or 5 lines, okay, just to get a vibe of it. The paper is called on the relationship between caste and Hinduism, okay. You will notice in the very first sentence or in the second sentence, Declan Quigley, of course, for our new viewers, Declan Quigley is one of those people whose research, he's a social anthropologist. He used to be a professor at University of St. Andrews. Now he has quit academia and he runs sort of a yoga slash chiropractors kind of a thing called body minding in Spain. So he is one of those people whose research can be used to prove, whose research actually directly proves that casteism has nothing to do with Hinduism, the religion per se. So in the very first sentence or in the very second sentence, as far as I remember, he hits the ball out of the park and says that, you know, people will say Hinduism is just a way of life. It's not really a religion. But the moment it comes to caste, they say Hinduism is so strong a religion that casteism is inextricably linked with Hinduism. You cannot decouple the two. That's how he starts the paper. And the second thing I want to just remind you all inform you all, for those of you who don't know, Vivek is running for the post of governor of Ohio. So make sure you retweet everything he writes and give him the algo boost from here, because we like him, because he's a nice force for humanity. Gujaramesh Ramji from Khetri. Oh, nice. Okay, then I want to present counterpoints that Ladli Behan scheme is a net positive. Freebies, if structured in the right way, is a net positive. No, it's not. First of all, it creates dependency on the government. Second of all, it creates precedence for bad people also going on with the yojana, whereas taking some side evil benefits from the woman maybe. And thirdly, people are having to pay for it without their consent. And there is practically no difference between the Ladli Behan and Hamara Lokir Bhandar, because that's just for women. You have to be beneath a certain amount of financial security to avail that. Yeah, we are going to do full foreign interference, bro. So yeah, let's start the paper. on the relationship between caste and Hinduism. Okay, let me bring the paper here and put that on the other monitor. Let's start then. Every serious work on Hinduism emphasizes the extraordinary diversity of that religion, of that quote unquote religion, to the point where many ask whether it makes a great deal of sense to call Hinduism a religion at all, in the sense of a relatively cohesive or core set of beliefs and ritual practices. On the other hand, every serious work on caste emphasizes the extraordinary uniformity of the beliefs and ritual practices associated with this institution or set of institutions. It is a curious fact, then, that there is a near unanimous consensus that caste and Hinduism are inextricably linked. A statement cited in the opening pages of Lipner's textbook on Hinduism might well have come from Weber or any of his intellectual descendants, whose interpretations of caste have dominated intellectual discussion of the subject in the disciplines of sociology and social anthropology. Quote, caste is the Hindu form of social organization. No man can be a Hindu who is not in caste. However, end quote. However, Lipner reminds us that there is a dissenting minority view which states that one must be very careful in making this equation. Quote, the caste system, though closely integrated into the Hindu religion, is not essential to it. ये सब कौन लोग हैं, कहाँ से आ जाते हैं? Hinduism is of course absolutely related to caste, and there can be no Hinduism without caste, according to Dumo and Trads. And these guys are saying it's not essential to it. This is pure Western propaganda. Even the profession of belief in the authority of the Veda is not essential. ये सबका Western propaganda कर दिया. In this chapter 1, I will support Brockington's decoupling of caste and Hinduism, though from a rather different perspective. Those who insist on the connection, it will be argued, invariably select only certain ideological features of caste as worthy of consideration. So they pick and choose, they nitpick. कुछ चूज करो, उसको बताओ कि यही है worthy of consideration, while dismissing others as if they simply did not exist. Oh, Declan Quigley has come out swinging. Nice. This typically goes hand in hand with an obliviousness to certain historical and sociological features which characterize caste and which explain its distinctiveness from other forms of social organization, such as tribe or state or class. इसमें तो मैक्स वेबर ने भी काफी काम किया है. What exactly do we mean by caste? What almost everyone can agree on is that wherever there is caste, certain features are found linked together in a systematic fashion. Perhaps most noticeable, particularly to Western, relatively liberal egalitarian eyes, is an apparently constant preoccupation with maintaining differences between groups and expressing these differences through concepts of pollution and inauspiciousness. These groups are based on lineal kinship, not kingship, kinship, familial ties, and tightly regulated marriage alliances between households of different lineages. From one perspective, regulating marriage often appears to be a device on the part of wealthy households for inhibiting the dispersal of land ownership. But non-landowning lineages, whether wealthy merchants or impoverished groups, also regulate their marriages just as strictly as members of landowning lineages. The fundamental message being circulated by members of all quote-unquote castes, that is, groups of intermarrying lineages, is invariably phrased in terms of an encouragement to prevent one's own kind from being contaminated, with the word for kind in most languages being jati or some variant thereof, a concept which might also be translated as species. So for those of who are our new viewers joining us in the last few weeks, there are a bunch of legit credentialed academics all over the world of all races and religions that we discuss, who are the force behind proving that Hinduism has nothing to do with casteism. Among them, the foremost people are Professor Declan Quigley, Nicholas B. Dirks, husband of Janki Bakle, Max Weber to a large extent, Romila Thapar, Irfan Habib. Irfan Habib is my favorite person in this topic, and Dayabati Roy for some aspects, and Sumit Guha. Sumit Guha, by the way, if there's any Marathi people listening, Sumit Guha's entire body of work is specifically focused on Maharashtrian Jajmani systems. It is as if members of different groups were saying, we are different from each other in the same way that different animal species are. Just as cats and dogs cannot interbreed, neither can we. Interestingly, there's a text in Buddhism which quotes Lord Buddha saying that even dogs maintain caste better than Brahmins because dogs interbreed only with dogs, but Brahmins marry outside their caste. Lol. So, since they can't interbreed, neither can we. Since some relativist thinkers are reluctant to say that people with other cultural ideas are wrong, it needs perhaps to be stressed, if we are going to explain the ideology, that different castes must not miscegenate, that there is in fact only one human species and its members are not prevented from interbreeding because of their different origins. The arbitrary cultural nature of the prohibition on intermixing is shown more clearly still by the fact that it is not restricted to procreation. Members of different castes are generally convinced that they should not eat together, roti bandi, except on special occasions, and then should not. Special occasions क्या है? पूजा पाठ के कोई उत्सव की तैयारी में क्या एक साथ बैठ जाते थे? And then should not eat normal everyday food, and that they should abstain from performing certain rituals together. It is not uncommon for a village to have 20 or more castes, all claiming to abjure relations of any fundamental kind with each other. But why should there be such a proliferation of kinds wherever there is caste? A preliminary clue is that in caste organized communities, normally, one kind predominates in every sense, politically, economically, numerically, and as the provider of the main patrons of rituals. Conventionally referred to as the dominant caste, following Srinivas, they are more accurately entitled the noble or kingly caste, जिसका proximity to power सबसे ज़्यादा है. It being understood that nobility and kingship are refractions of each other, as will become clearer later. All of the other castes are groups of lineages which have an obligation to provide people who will perform specialized ritual duties for the noble caste. To default on these obligations always incurs some kind of sanction, which is frequently underpinned by the threat, if not the actual use of violence. Not the actual use of violence. Generally, the only people who can escape from these ritual obligations are those merchants who are not dependent on landowners, banyas, or renouncers. Okay, the sannyasis who live a mendicant life outside of the sedentary communities organized along caste lines. While there is a great deal of variation among theorists regarding the alleged underlying mechanisms which generate this phenomenon, whereby a multiplicity of groups all fastidiously distinguish themselves from each other, most people would agree that certain features stand out when caste is compared to other forms of social organization. Of these, perhaps the most striking is the institution of untouchability, whereby members of certain castes are so excluded that they appear on occasion to be beyond the pale of normal society. One very common and perfectly acceptable way to approach caste is thus by explaining untouchability. Crudely, though not inaccurately, there are two main explanations for untouchability, both of which present untouchables as the quote-unquote opposites of Brahmanas, spelled in various ways, Brahmins. Both of these approaches envisage caste organization as hierarchical. In the commonly accepted sense of this term, a ladder-like system of statuses. Statuses. Are status bol diya? How our job here is done. Max Weber, RSS Kadalla, Max Weber first said it. Ladder-like system of statuses. In both approaches, Brahmins are at the top and untouchables are at the bottom. Quote-unquote top and quote-unquote bottom. According to one approach, this is so because Brahmanas are priests and priests are pure, while untouchables are polluted because they perform degrading tasks which deal with the inauspicious facets of life and death. According to the other approach, the superiority of Brahmanas is fundamentally based on landed wealth and the power which derives from it, while the wretched condition of untouchables results from the fact that they are typically landless and dispossessed. According to this latter theory, all talk of purity and pollution, whether by those who practice caste or those who analyze it, simply obscures the underlying economic and political reality. Political reality. Why? This is why I love Declan Quigley. I will show shortly that neither of these theories is sustainable because the underlying assumption of a stratified ladder-like series of caste statuses does not match certain crucial features of the known ethnography. क्योंकि हर कास्ट तो हर जगह पे सेम स्टेटस में नहीं है. And even Irfan Habib admits sometimes there is even horizontal hierarchy. Vertical hierarchy है भी नहीं कहीं पे. Before elaborating on this, however, it is necessary to consider the most celebrated and influential, though also the most attacked theorist of caste, Louis Dumont, who argues against the idea of caste as stratification, but then confuses the issue by appearing to employ precisely this concept. तो हमने जिन जिन लोगों को पढ़ा है, डर्क से लेके सुमित गुहा, इरफान हबीब, सब लोगों का सुबह से शाम काम है डूमो को धोना. इन लोगों का बहुत मतलब दिमाग गर्म हुआ है डूमो के ऊपर. डूमो ने इतना खराब एनालिसिस दिया है कास्ट का, जो कि बाय द वे इंडियन पॉलिटिकल डिस्कोर्स में डूमो का व्यू ही सैक्रोसैंक्ट है. कांग्रेस, बीजेपी, आरएसएस, कुशल मेहरा, इन सबको डूमो का व्यू ही लगता है कि हाँ यही है कास्टिज्म और यही है कास्ट. एंड कॉमीज who worship Irfan Habib won't listen to Irfan Habib's critiques of Dumont, or don't understand when he criticizes Dumont. Dumont attempts to escape from the notion of caste as stratification by introducing us to a second meaning of hierarchy, that of the encompassment of the part by the whole, which implies also the encompassment of something by its contrary. Thus, for example, in traditional societies, the individual is encompassed by society, and in caste society, argues Dumont, the pure encompasses the impure. Dumont argues that Western theorists and those influenced by them tend to see caste through modern individualistic spectacles and to apply a set of judgments which are not applicable in the holistic traditions of caste-organized communities, where the individual is subordinated to, encompassed by, the moral claims of the collective. And so you see, even Dumont wasn't doing this to demean Indian culture in a way. He was saying that it's okay, they are this way, this is what it is. He was being respectful, which is why there's so much possible crossover and alliance between Dumont and Trads. Moinagda is saying you take Kushal Mehta too seriously. I take him seriously because he's the closest to my social vibe and circles. No, he's a urban English speaking guy, wears t-shirt, those kind. He's basically in my consumption pattern. He used to be a rock drummer at one point, so that's why it's more disappointing when he says absolutely insane things. But then in most things I agree with him. The more caste organized communities where the individual is subordinated to, encompassed by, the moral claims of the collective. He is perfectly correct to state that caste ideology gives primacy to the whole community and has no place for the modern Western concept of individualism, where people are free to make their own choices about whom they associate with. In connection with this, everyone will argue with Dumont that caste involves a heavy and pervasive use of ritual for structuring social relations, which in many other societies are structured by centralized political and economic institutions. हर जगह पे जो कि पॉलिटिकल और इकोनॉमिक इंस्टीट्यूशन से होता है, यहाँ पे वो रिचुअल के नाम से होता है. In the Indian case, argues Dumont, this is according to Dumont, by the way. In the Indian case, argues Dumont, this holism expresses itself with reference to two ideological features: the opposition of the pure and the impure, and what he calls the disjunction between status and power. By the latter, by power, he means that those who are the most politically powerful defer to the representatives of the religious values because the ultimate meaning of the society derives from those values. ये हमारे टेक्स्ट में है, ये नाम पे ही है भाई, ये एक्चुअली फॉलो नहीं हुआ है, कभी होता नहीं है, दिखावे के लिए होता है. This is why he claims in everyday life the priest ranks higher than the king, and in the Varna scheme of the Vedic texts, the Brahmana ranks higher than the Kshatriya. Dumont's theory has had pervasive and enduring appeal in spite of a torrent of criticism from every conceivable angle. The reason for this appeal is simple. Hindus themselves often claim that Brahmanas are the highest caste and untouchables the lowest, and Dumont's approach appears to provide an explanation for this. But this common popular formulation of the order of castes runs into problems immediately. First, there are thousands of Brahmana castes whose members daily dispute each other's status. Evidently, if one Brahmana caste claims superiority over another Brahmana caste, not all of them can be the highest. And if Brahmanas are higher than others, then the criterion of being higher obviously must be by virtue of something other than simply being a Brahmana. But what? This is one of the trickiest and most contested questions in the explanation of caste. Bhai, kya articulation hai? Oof. The evidence needed to resolve this question, however, points overwhelmingly in one direction. The work of some priests, i.e., that is, performers of ritual activities on behalf of others, is clearly regarded by everyone in caste organized communities as defiling. Some priests. This seems relatively uncontroversial in relation to the members of those castes who deal overtly with death or the disposal of liminal substances such as cut hair and nails, feces, menstrual blood, and afterbirth. Which society does not have to deal with these by setting them apart? अरे बाप रे, अब आरएसएस का दल्ला बन गया क्या डेक्लन क्विगली भी? ये तो एपोलॉजी भी दे रहा है कि हाँ भाई ये तो होना ही था. But the work of a number of authors, Histerman, Raheja, suggest a much more radical view of ritual activity, because it would appear that it is not merely dealing with the physical byproducts of human life and decay, which is dangerous. It is not just castes such as barbers and tanners, washermen and sweepers, they argue, whose status is endangered by their ritual activities. So too is the status of Brahmana priests, who are normally conceived of as the highest castes because of their alleged distance from the polluting functions of untouchable and other lowly specialist castes. All priestly activity is dangerous because it involves the acceptance of gifts, commonly referred to as dana, which act as vessels for the inauspicious qualities which the patron, the king, the patron of the ritual, is attempting to shed. The evidence for this is both ethnographic and textual, and indicates clearly that members of Brahmana castes who function as priests are tainted or compromised by their ritual activities. Many members of Brahmana castes display their awareness of this problem by their reluctance to take on priestly duties. These non-priestly Brahmanas, who are told, widely despise Brahman priests. Yes, and you'll know that Brahmins used to do a lot of things back in the day, right? They used to be amatyas, teachers. Priests तो सब नहीं बनते थे, तो priest के लिए ब्राह्मण वर्णा में सबसे कम respect था ही. उनसे भी नीचे तो था कि जो लोग श्राद्ध कम कर्म करते हैं, मगर आज भी ब्राह्मण priest का उतना कहाँ श्रद्धा है. सब लोग मतलब नेगोशिएट करते हैं, अरे पंडित जी आइए थोड़ा, अरे 500 लेंगे नहीं 400 लीजिए. ये मतलब जो लोग विश्वास करते हैं पूरी तरह से हिंदू धर्म में या फिर even in caste, even they negotiate to such an extent. This is not to imply that all ritual tasks enjoy equal esteem or equal lack of esteem. Manifestly, this is not the case. As a rough rule of thumb, one might say that those castes whose functions are most closely associated with death and decay have the lowest status, while those whose functions are more ethereal enjoy the highest status. King ka advisor वगैरह, cushy job. However, the relative evaluation of ये क्या different है आज से, सब same चल रहा है. However, the relative evaluation of caste status is far from being an easy matter, since the paradigmatic ritual which connects members of the noble castes to others is sacrifice, and this is by its nature simultaneously ethereal and implicated in violent death. Brahmanas normally represent themselves as being removed from the violent aspect of sacrifice, but this is always relative, and in the final analysis, something of an illusion or delusion. This theme cannot be pursued here without a full-blown exploration of the nature of sacrifice. Sacrifice में हमने थोड़ा रेने जिरार्ड का व्यूज डिस्कस किया था, याद है? I think वो relevant होगा यहाँ पे. It's not that Declan Quigley reads René Girard, but René Girard's views are very, very universal in terms of sacrifice, his research on sacrifice. I don't know when I'll get to it. I really want to discuss it from our live stream, his book on sacrifices. Suffice it to say that the ambiguity which is at the heart of this primal ritual of death and rebirth translates into caste relations, as we will see a little later. One might object, however, that if it is the actual performance of ritual functions which is hazardous for one's status, it is curious that the status of other members of the caste is also compromised even when they do not themselves perform impure tasks. These people are affected because they either come from one's own lineage, that is, they are related consanguinely, or they come from other lineages with whom members of one's own lineage conventionally marry, that is, they are related affinally. Caste status cannot therefore be interactional. as Marriott argued in a very influential article which contrasted with the attribunal theory of Dumo. Kinship and marriage are also primary determinants of caste status. Ethnographic reports often fail to make clear that all members of castes do not need to perform the ritual function from which they derive their status. What is crucial is that one or more members of the caste in question provide the necessary ritual functionary. Caste is often reported to be a matter of occupation. This is false. What is at issue is a periodic ritual contribution to the community. All of the members of one caste may be agricultural laborers, yet only some among them may be required to perform a particular ritual function, say, to play music on the occasion of worshipping a particular deity. Another caste, that is, a group with whom the former will not intermarry, may also be agricultural laborers and have a different ritual function, say, to be pallbearers for noble castes. मतलब वो पॉल बेरर पता है तो तुम लोगों को खटिया कंधे पे लेना मृत्यु के बाद while being taken to the cremation ground. Discrimination of this kind can be endless. As with totemic groups, even among groups where the link between caste and occupation appears more clear-cut, it is rarely the case that all members of the caste perform the job in question. Thus, to be a barber is not to be a hair cutter, but to be related to others whose ritual function involves the cutting of hair and other related tasks, such as nail paring and midwifery, as elements of purificatory ceremonies. So, dekho, who do you know? Your contacts, your proximity to power, all depends on your family ties. It was the same back then as well. चाचा हमारे विधायक थे तब भी आज भी है, मेरे नहीं है. A barber could therefore be a taxi driver, while the man cutting hair in the barber's shop, that is as a profession rather than as part of a ritual function, could well be a member of another caste. Similarly, a brahmana need not be a priest, a farmer may be a rickshaw driver, and so on. These three indisputable ethnographic realities, the fundamental nature of lineal affiliation in providing caste status, the fact that only some members of a caste perform the ritual function which gives all of the members of the caste their status, and the fact that members of a variety of like समझ लो कि some senior IAS officer or even technocrat, okay, let's say Sanjeev Sanyal, his family members are going to be looked upon by everyone else as his family members or relatives are going to be looked upon by the friends of those family members even as, okay, this guy is a relative of Sanjeev Sanyal, this guy is a friend of Sanjeev Sanyal, holy shit. तो पूरा का पूरा status group ही change हो गया है because Sanjeev Sanyal does a particular job with the king, with his proximity to power. These three indisputable ethnographic realities, the fundamental nature of lineal affiliation in providing caste status, the fact that only some members of a caste perform the ritual function, which gives all of the members of the caste their status, and the fact that members of a variety of castes perform ritual functions, which are widely regarded as inherently dangerous, mean that there are four mistakes in the often repeated formula that Brahmanas are the highest caste because they are priests. Firstly, not all priests are Brahmanas. Not many Brahmanas are not priests. Holy shit. See, this is good research, guys. This is good anthropological research. ये ऐसे काम होते हैं कभी कभी. सब कुछ वेस्टर्न प्रोपेगेंडा नहीं है, पूरा का पूरा डिपार्ट hashtag not all anthropologists. See, who will disagree with this in the right wing? Okay, in the Indian right wing, even trads, even raitas, that not all priests are Brahmanas, not all Brahmanas are priests. तो कैसे हो गया कि Brahmanas are the topmost caste because they are priests? What मतलब premise में ही घपला है. Shekhar, it is 100% nobility. It is absolutely nobility and nothing else. Many Brahmanas are not priests. They are Brahmanas because they are related to other Brahmanas who may or may not be priests themselves. If they are assumed to be related to priests at some point, this may be in the distant or forgotten past. Point 3 is, at least some priests are degraded by their ritual activities, and according to some authorities, all of them are. Fourthly, if the performance of ritual functions is degrading or compromising, this implies that only the renouncer, who is by definition outside caste organized society, a sannyasi like Yogi Adityanath, can claim to be pure. This concept of most pure cannot then be equated with the highest, since highest indicates inside. Holy shit. So the most pure is actually outside the system, whereas people are saying that the highest one in the system is also most pure. दोनों एक साथ कैसे चलेगा? The most important conclusion one can draw from these observations. What a brilliant point. So, if the performance of ये point एक बार फिर से सुनो. If the performance of ritual functions is degrading or compromising, this implies that only the renouncer, the sannyasi, who is by definition outside caste organized society, can claim to be pure. क्योंकि भाई पूजा पाठ करके ही तो सब लोग impure थोड़े बहुत बन रहे हैं. तो the concept of most pure cannot then be equated with the highest, since highest indicates inside the caste system or hierarchy. The most important conclusion one can draw from these observations is that the idea that Brahmanas are the highest caste makes no sense, irrespective of the fact that it is very widely held by Hindus themselves and by commentators on Hinduism and the Trad Commie Dumo alliance. There is no doubt that ritual activity is directed at the ridding of inauspicious qualities, but this does not indicate a capacity to rank groups as higher and lower. On the contrary, careful study of the ethnographic record shows that it is always impossible to rank castes unambiguously or without contestation. Ambiguity and dispute are built into the structure of caste relations. This is seen both in relations between patrons of rituals and priests of various kinds and among patron castes themselves. Lol. Once these points are admitted, much of Dumo's theory of caste quickly starts to unravel. For Dumo, the opposition of the pure and the impure depends on priests monopolizing ritual functions which were once the preserve of the king. Quote, power in India became secular at a very early date, but in spite of the fact that his entire theory of caste hangs on this claim. Okay, that was the quote. But in spite of the fact that his entire theory of caste hangs on this claim, Dumo provides no evidence to support it, bar his own assertions that Brahmanas are now unambiguously the highest caste and untouchables the lowest. With much textual and ethnographic evidence suggesting otherwise, it is fortunate that there is an alternative way of approaching the problem which does not depend on concepts of highest and lowest. The pollution concepts, which are the hallmark of caste, are conventionally said to be an expression of Hinduism, even though we know perfectly well that this is not a monolithic set of beliefs. RSS Kadalla, Declan, Quigley. An alternative representation of caste values portrays them as an expression of institutions associated with kingship. This approach, the proximity to power. This approach, which is often associated with the seminal work of Hokart, has certain advantages over any other explanation of caste. First, it offers an explanation of why caste organization is found in some parts of the Indian subcontinent but not others. Typically, caste originates in regions which are ecologically capable of sustaining kingdoms. Relatively, because जहाँ पे इकोलॉजी है नहीं वहाँ पे लोग इक्वली गरीब भिखारी बनेंगे, तो वहाँ पे मतलब अगर कोई इकोनॉमिक या पावर का हायरार्की ही नहीं है, वहाँ पे स्टेटस नहीं होता है, तो स्टेटस नहीं होगा तो कास्ट नहीं होगा. Relatively large populations in a relatively small area. Caste is associated with fertile agriculture, not with barren mountainous or desert regions. Secondly, it offers an explanation of why caste organization is found among non-Hindu communities in India, Nepal and Sri Lanka. and why very similar forms of social organization are found in other monarchical and feudal societies, which give ideological stress to what Geertz has aptly called the exemplary center. Holy shit. This is the most eye-opening and RSS Kadalla-ish paper of Declan Quigley, isn't it? The other ones were not this overt. This is absolutely overt. This is absolutely Hindutva RSS talking points. Fuck. Caste is associated with fertile agriculture, not with barren, mountainous or desert regions. वहाँ पे होगा ही नहीं. Secondly, it offers an explanation of why caste organization is found among non-Hindu communities in India, Nepal and Sri Lanka, and why very similar forms of social organization are found in other monarchical and feudal societies, which give ideological stress to what Geertz has aptly called the exemplary center. Caste ideology is an expression of the conflicting demands of two different principles of social organization. On the one hand, there is the hierarchical principle of monarchy, a form of centralization which of itself is always very tenuous because it is dependent on personal patronage. On the other hand, there is the relatively egalitarian principle of lineage organization, which simultaneously stresses kinship, sameness, and marriageability, difference but bridgeable difference. दोस्ती को रिश्तेदारी में बदल दिया. To be a member of a lineage in a caste organized society is to identify first with one's own lineal kin in opposition to members of all other lineages, then to identify with that group of lineages inside of which one may seek spouses in opposition to those lineages which are not acceptable marriage partners. Hocart brings together these principles of organization in caste society by arguing that castes are families which hereditarily transfer ritual functions in order to ensure that the king and nobles remain in a pure state. In contrast to the idea that caste is oriented to a pure-impure axis, with brahmanas and untouchables at polar ends, Hocart argues that what is at stake is the integrity of kingship, the institution to which everyone is connected. By implication, it is a very fragile integrity which can only be maintained by the repeated performance of rituals or sacrifices. The integrity of kingship provides a model, an exemplary center for others to emulate by replicating the king's rituals on a lesser scale. Remember this, we had discussed in Nicholas Dirks's paper, Little Kings. के मेन राजा अकेले चंद्रगुप्त मौर्य के अराउंड तो सब नहीं घूम रहे हैं, बाकी जो बार कास्ट है सब के सब बार कास्ट थोड़ी बार जाके चंद्रगुप्त मौर्य का बाल काटता है. एक ही तो बार मौर्य का चंद्रगुप्त मौर्य का बाल काटेगा, तो बाकी सब बार क्या कर रहे हैं भाई. तो जो बार्बर, जो चंद्रगुप्त मौर्य का बार्बर है उसका स्टेटस अलग है. फिर जो अलग अलग गांव है या फिर एक कास्ट का एक गांव है, वहां पे भी कोई एक बार्बर है, वहां का कोई एक प्रीस्ट है, उसका नाम से वो कास्ट में सेम हो सकता है कि हाँ मैं भी बार्बर तुम भी बार्बर, मगर मेरे नेबरहुड का सलून और हबीब सेम नहीं है. The integrity of kingship provides a model, an exemplary center for others to emulate by replicating the king's rituals on a lesser scale. Genius. Hocart's approach endorses Dumont's assertion that the separation of king and priest, as he put it, the quote-unquote disjunction between status and power, is central to the theory of caste. Okay. Right? But it shows that Dumont was quite wrong about the dynamic of relations between kings and priests and the underlying structure they depended on. Nobility and kingship are not a simple matter of material dominance, but are concerned with the ability to command rituals which bring the community together and expurgate the inauspiciousness which social life habitually generates. Priests are the instruments who perform this purging function and who therefore make possible kingship and nobility. क्योंकि देखो, पूजा अगर नहीं होता है तो जगह का प्योरिटी, इनऑस्पिशियसनेस कैसे बरकरार रहेगा. तो जो काम वो कर रहा है प्रीस्ट के वजह से किंग्स का, नोबिलिटी का प्योरिटी मेंटेन हो रहा है. कास्ट ऑर्गेनाइजेशन could thus be said to be a division of the, so therefore the priests are just employees of the king. Caste organization could thus be said to be a division of the community into noble and kingly families on the one hand and priests on the other, provided it is understood that the primary function of priests is to cleanse the society of anything which threatens it with death and evil. In the modern post-colonial period, the ostensible disappearance of kings from the political scene has not led the disappearance of kingship as an organizing principle of ritual and social relations, though this has often been obscured by modern political realities. Even Raheja, whose brilliant ethnography exposed the fault lines of Dumont's theory more clearly than any other recent work, muddies the waters somewhat when considering the nature of caste in contemporary India. She writes that, quote, kingship no longer exists, but it has been perhaps replaced by the ritual centrality of the dominant caste, end quote. The word replaced is unfortunate because it has always been the function of members of dominant castes to patronize ritual, replicating on a diminished scale the role of the king. Put differently, members of dominant castes continue to be mini kings. not just materially, but in terms of their political slash ritual function. They are, quote unquote, at the center of a complex ritual organization that permeates nearly every aspect of the everyday life of the village. This real world fact of kingship patronage sits uneasily with Dumo's insistence that the king's role has been secularized, and much more comfortably with Hockart's claim that the king patron is the principle of the ritual. A phrase which I have elided from the two quotes from Raheja in the previous paragraphs, further confuses understanding of both kingship and relations between patrons of rituals and the priests who carry them out. In the village of her field work, she says, quote, as in many of the textual traditions on kingship, the Brahmana is hierarchically superior, yet the dominant landholding caste stands at the center of a complex ritual organization. End quote. It is difficult to see what the foundation for this alleged superiority is, other than an ingrained idea that Brahmanas must be superior because that is what everyone else seems to believe these days. In practice, superiority seems to attach to members of the landholding caste in both ritual and non-ritual domains. Superiority seems to attach to members of the landholding caste in both ritual and non-ritual domains. If the Brahmana is hierarchically, quote unquote, hierarchically superior in an ideological sense, it is a Brahmana who is so idealized that he cannot possibly belong to the world of caste relations, where he would be tainted by the receipt of prestations for performing ritual services. Like we have read Manusmriti. Most Brahmanas could have ever followed Manusmriti to the T. It's an impossible to lead lifestyle. It cannot be the Brahmana of the village who is necessarily immersed in caste, that is, interdependent on caste relations, and who is therefore, like everyone else, caught up in the web of inauspiciousness, which is the product of the dealings of normal social life. Interestingly, Dumo's theory predicts just this eventuality. Quote, Dumo says, in theory, power is ultimately subordinate to priesthood, whereas in fact, priesthood submits to power. End quote. Dumo ये सब बोलता है, मगर फिर जाके अपने आप को कॉन्ट्रडिक्ट करता है, that too without any evidence. के नहीं भाई, priesthood submits to power, मगर Brahmins are superior to Kshatriya. ये है डुमो का व्यू, ठीक है? इसलिए इनको आजकल इतना गाली पड़ता है. One of the problems with any understanding of caste is that the word caste itself has been used to translate two quite different Sanskrit concepts, which are assumed quite wrongly to have an automatic connection. We have already encountered the concept of jati and its sense of kind or species. Another way of glossing this concept might be to say the group that one was born into. The relativity of this gloss conveying the contextual nature of jati ascriptions. When asked to name their jati, people may name their patrilineage, the name of the group of lineages they conventionally marry into, or even the name of what would now be called an ethnic group. However, even though the concept is elastic, the idea of origin by birth is constant. There is no mystery about this. If a British person is asked, where are you from? He or she may give the name of a village, a country, a county, or even a continent, depending on the interpretation given to what the questioner is seeking. Scholars approaching caste through the study of Hinduism and comparative religion may be less acquainted with the sociological and anthropological studies of caste on the ground, and are more likely to be familiar with the Vedic concept of varna, which is also used to translate the word caste. Wow. The referent of this concept is rather different from that of jati, since the fundamental idea is less belonging to a group by virtue of common birth than functions which must be performed if cosmic harmony and social harmony are to prevail. It being understood that cosmic harmony and social harmony are dependent on each other. Jatha Pinde Tata Brahmande also. What the Varna and Jati concepts share is an idea of keeping apart, and it is this which allows them to become conflated in the concept of caste. In fact, the original idea of Varna does seem to imply differences of origins between the Vedic Indians who call themselves noble ones, Aryas, and the other peoples. अच्छा भाई, कोनराडेल्स का ये कहना है कि आर्या simply means noble, whereas हमारे कौमियों का कहना है कि Aryans means only Brahmins who are outsiders. Now Declan Quigley is also saying that Arya means noble ones. तो Vedic Indians who call themselves noble ones, and the other peoples they encountered, chiefly the Harappans to begin with. अच्छा ये तो Aryan invasion theory के ऊपर ही है. But the idea of separating conquerors from indigenes seems to quickly become subordinate to an idea of protecting nobility, which is independent of any consideration of ethnic origins. It has been mentioned that rituals performed by priests on behalf of members of patron, noble, or kingly castes are paradigmatically sacrifices. It is no accident that the concept of Varna is inextricably linked, tied to a sacrificial theory of human society. The famous verse from Rigveda speaks of four Varnas: Brahmana, Rajanya, later conventionally referred to as the Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra, each of which springs from a different part of the body of Purusha, the Lord of Beings, which is portrayed as having been sacrificed at the beginning of time. Note that there is nothing here about lineage or pedigree. तो कोई vertical hierarchy नहीं है, and neither is there in the later law book known as the Code of Manu, circa 200 BC to 200 AD. In this text, each Varna is portrayed as having a quintessentially different function. अरे RSS का दल्ला डेक्लन क्विगली अब बोल रहा है कि भाई हायरार्की का बात तो वेद में भी नहीं है, मनुस्मृति में भी नहीं है. What the fuck? And people say no, it's all because of wrong translation. ये कौन सा ट्रांसलेशन? ये क्या थोड़ा ही मतलब आरएसएस का ट्रांसलेशन पढ़ा क्या डेक्लन क्विगली ने? उन्होंने तो इंग्लिश ट्रांसलेशन ही पढ़ा, कोई ब्रिटिश आदमी का. कैसे हो रहा है ये सब? Let me have a sip of coffee and check out some comments now. Holy shit. Nice discussion here. No. First of all, no one really needs to annihilate or eliminate Jati Varna, because there are two ways of looking at Jati Varna. One is the traditional names of your lineage that you call Jati, which are just cosplaying as something real when they are not, because the moment they are not incentivized by the state to maintain your caste status, etc., or even caste lineage, that's when they move away from it. There's no incentive to maintain those caste hierarchies, and then they move away from it. But instead, if there is incentive to follow only competence, individuality, etc., because of capitalism, free market, then it happens naturally. There are no laws, especially for Hindus, that you can do to convince people to do otherwise. भाई जिस पॉपुलेशन ने इस्लामिक इन्वेजन सह लिया, इतने सारे मिशनरीज को सह लिया, उन लोगों को कौन सा भोसरी का डिक्टेटर आके बोलेगा कि आज से जाति वर्ण आइडेंटिफिकेशन मन में भी करना बंद, and everyone gets convinced of that. Meanwhile, if they go on with reservations, that dictator, okay? वैसे नहीं होता है. मन में वो फॉलो करेगा. कौन किससे शादी कर रहा है अल्टीमेटली जाके वो थोड़ी नरेंद्र मोदी या योगी आदित्यनाथ जाके चेक करेगा, या फिर ये कंपलसरी होगा कि नहीं भोसरी के तुमको अलग कास्ट में ही मैरी करना है. वो कैसे होता है? तो the better, more fruitful, constructive way of looking at it is that jatis were always status groups. Even today we have status groups, and I refuse to believe that anyone really marries outside their status groups. The anuloma or pratiloma, which is the unnatural one. Unnatural one is that you marry in a weirdly different status group. Okay, some people do that just to punish their parents or whatever, or they are so deeply madly in love. Most people even today marry inside their status group only because status group is signified by their consumption patterns and stuff. Unless the parents force them into marrying someone just because they were in their caste but they are not from the same status, that's when things get even more fucked. तो अब वहाँ पे वो marriage कैसा है हमको सबको पता है. But consensual love marriages and stuff, or even if it's arranged, more often than not, like think of Vivek and Apurva theory. Both Brahmins, but both are from Yale. Both are highly qualified academics and stuff in academia. So they fell in love and then they got married. So did Vivek fall in love with Apurva because she was Brahmin? Does anyone honestly fucking believe that? So she was in her caste only, right? Because she was in his status group only. But what I'm pointing out to you is that in a hypothetical situation that Vivek and Apurva did not really meet, but they went to Yale, but maybe did not ever meet in Yale. Okay, but both of these people's parents set up an arrangement situation between them. Okay, because they were Brahmins, but also what some parents do keep in mind, which is actual social status in today's context. Okay, even then Vivek and Apurva would get married. Even then it would be an intra-caste marriage. तो उस नजरिए से देखो तो देन यूल इवन योर क्वेश्चंस विल गेट बेटर बिकॉज तुम्हारा क्वेश्चन का प्रेमिस समझाने में ही मुझे एक्स्ट्रा 2-3 मिनट गया ना, उसमें प्रॉब्लम है. तो जाति क्या है एग्जैक्टली वो सोच के तुम अप्रोच करो इस प्रॉब्लम को. तो कोई फोर्स करना ही नहीं है, करना चाहिए ही नहीं होगा. प्रतिलोमा डज नॉट वर्क इन मोस्ट ऑफ द केसेस बिकॉज वायलेट्स द प्रिंसिपल ऑफ फीमेल हाइपरगमी. या okay, let's continue. Note that there is nothing here about lineage or pedigree, and neither is there in the later law book known as the Code of Manu. In this text, each varna is portrayed as having a quintessentially different function. What the fuck? These functions are मनुस्मृति जलाएगा, अब डेक्लन क्विगली का पेपर प्रिंट आउट करके जलाएंगे पीडीएफ में. These functions revolve around sacrifice, just as the world and the 4 varnas were created through an initial sacrifice. Repetitions of this primal act are necessary if order and harmony are to be maintained. To achieve this, each varna has a specific function. Quote, Manu lays down that the duty of the Brahmana is to study and to teach, to sacrifice and to give and receive gifts. The Kshatriya must protect the people, sacrifice and study. The Vaishya also sacrifices and studies, but his chief function is to breed cattle, to till the earth, to pursue trade and to lend money. Excuse me. The Shudra's duty is only to serve the 3 higher castes. For each man, there was a place in society and a function to fulfill with its own duties and rights. ये Basham का translation है. Note again that there is no mention of any idea that a person performing any specific function must be born into a particular group. Yet there is a common idea that people who belong to a particular jati must automatically have a corresponding varna or belong to the residual category of untouchables who are not mentioned in the Vedic schema. इसीलिए ex post facto mapping of jatis into varnas more often than not becomes imfucking possible, which was pointed out to me by Madam Political Scientist. And more importantly, देखो जब लोगों को चुतियापा हरामीगिरी करना होता है तब लोग मनुस्मृति को भी बाईपास कर जाते हैं. Unfortunately, reality is not so simple. Yes, यही तो हमारा पॉइंट है. रियलिटी भाई बुक से नहीं चलता है. There is a great deal of dispute about which varna a particular jati should be associated with because everyone wants to be linked with the most noble lineage as possible and to dissociate themselves from anyone who might threaten their status. जैसे कि famous हितेश रंजन टंडन का पेपर, Brahmins going around being the attestation IAS babus. थोड़ा बहुत पैसा वैसा कमा लिया कहीं से, ब्राह्मण को पैसा दिया, बोला डिक्लेयर कर दिया, हाँ हाथ से तुम ऊपर के कास्ट में हो कोई, या फिर कोई कास्ट का नया नाम भी बना लिया, तेली तिली ये सब बन गया. Thus, from one perspective, someone may say, those people are landowners and come from the Rajput jati. Their varna is Kshatriya. Yet, some of the people referred to may not go along with this. They may say, it is true that other people consider those people over there as Rajputs like us, but in fact, they come from different lineages and are not nobles like us. Our varna is Kshatriya, but theirs is Shudra, and we would never marry them. Similarly, one group of priests may say that they are the priests of the former kings and nobility, and that this is made clear by the name of their jati. For example, Rajopadhyaya in the Kathmandu Valley, Nepal. Rajopadhyaya. Oh, what a nice surname. They might then claim that their varna is Brahmana, but distinguish themselves from other people in the community who call themselves Brahmanas, but who perform rituals for low caste households. They might insist that they would never marry with this other group of soy descent Brahmanas, and might insist that the latter are really Shudra. Considering yet another group of people who also call themselves Brahmanas, they might point out that the ritual role of this other group is restricted to the performance of funeral rites. वहाँ पे तो सबसे बड़ा problem है. And that they, the real Brahmanas, consider them to have a very low status, indeed to be in fact kind of untouchables. These kinds of invidious distinctions are part and parcel of how caste works. Contrary to the impression given by some earlier commentators that caste distinctions were rigid and universally agreed upon, others have always realized that there is a great deal of dispute about status. Quote, by organization and propaganda, a caste can change its name. Exactly what Hitesh Ranjan Shandal pointed out. And in the course of time, get a new one, accepted, and by altering its canons of behavior in the matter of diet and marriage can increase the estimation in which it is held. A number who claimed to be some a member who claimed to be some special sort of Kshatriya or Vaishya at the 1921 census claimed to be some peculiar kind of Brahman in 1931. Everything is incentive structures, guys. Everything is incentive. कोई बुक से मॉडलिटी रूल्स फूल्स नहीं होता है. Larger, broadly speaking, थोड़ा बहुत obviously होगा, but even that depends on the nature and climate ecology of the place. But micro level पे it's all pragmatism and incentive structures and disincentives. Both varna ascription and jati ascription are subject to claim and counter claim. ठीक है, 21 में जो बोल रहा है मैं क्षत्रिय हूं, 31 में बोल रहा है ब्राह्मण हूं, आज वो बोलेगा मैं दलित हूं, है ना? तो इंसेंटिव क्या बनने का है वही है, या फिर वो कहां पे है? कहीं पे क्षत्रिय बनने का इंसेंटिव है, कहीं पे ब्राह्मण नाम देने का इंसेंटिव है. जैसे कि एक और एग्जांपल देता हूं. वो साउथ ईस्ट एशिया में कुछ देश में बहुत बहुत बढ़िया बॉक्सिंग का सीन है. मैनी पैक्याओ जैसे लोग जहां से आते हैं, तो वहां पे उन प्रॉपर इंटरनेशनल लेवल बॉक्सर्स का सरनेम खरीदा जा सकता है. तुमको पता है? लेट्स से टुडे इफ योर सरनेम इज मोइनाक भट्टाचार्य, but you want to show people that you are actually a great boxer and probably are in some way related to Manny Pacquiao, you can pay Manny Pacquiao to basically ask for a copyright of his surname as well. Okay, कि मुझे भी Pacquiao surname चाहिए, just because then you'll get to get into bigger boxing competitions and leagues. कि Pacquiao नाम समझ के ही तुमको कुछ अलग सोचने लगेंगे. नाम के साथ ये सब जुड़ जाता है. Aham Dalitasmi, yes. Both Varna ascription and Jati ascription are subject to claim and counterclaim. Though there is a तो भाई क्या कहा भोसड़ी के मनुस्मृति कौन पढ़ा? Though there is a kind of obvious upper limit in that the more kingly a lineage can present itself, the less will its claims to Kshatriya status be open to contest. And by the way, Irfan Habib points out that Varna system is weird in the sense, or the caste system is weird in India because the victors always have to change their caste. Similarly, the more that a lineage can present itself as the domestic priests of kings and nobility, the less will its claims to Brahmana status be disputed. क्या problem है देखो. The more that a lineage can present itself as the domestic priests of kings and nobility, the less will its claims to Brahmana status be disputed because of proximity to power. One should not, however, assume that because certain people claim to be of Kshatriya or Brahmana status, that other people accept his claim. तो मनुस्मृति का क्या डिफरेंट ट्रांसलेशन पढ़ रहे हैं सब लोग, इसलिए डिस्प्यूट हो रहा है. डिस्प्यूट का सोर्स क्या है? अगर कास्टिज्म का सोर्स मनुस्मृति है या ऋग्वेद है या फिर इवन गीता है अकॉर्डिंग टू सम पीपल, तो डिस्प्यूट का सोर्स कौन है? And one should not assume that there is an automatic correspondence between Varna and Jati. Yes, this is very important to remember. This is not something that most people are aware of. There is no automatic correspondence between Varna and Jati any more than one should assume there is any inherent correspondence between English people called Smith and people who are Smiths by occupation. Readers of this book who wish to approach the problem of caste from the perspective of Hindu religious beliefs may be surprised that I have not referred to either of two indigenous Indian concepts, karma and dharma. Clearly, this results from my comparative approach, which seeks to explain the institution of caste in sociological terms rather than in terms of regional ideology. इसीलिए जब तुम रीजनल आइडियोलॉजी के चुतियापे में घुसोगे, आई फॉरगॉट हिंदी ऑल ऑफ अ सडन, घुसोगे, तब तुम्हें लगेगा कि हाँ वो सॉफ्ट बिगेटरी ऑफ लो एक्सपेक्टेशन, हाँ यहाँ के लोग ऐसे ही हैं, हाँ थोड़े क्यूट बच्चे हैं, हाँ थोड़ा कास्टिज्म वगैरह कर लेते हैं, मगर मैं तो मेरा सिर्फ ऑनेस्ट ऑब्जर्वेशन दे रहा हूँ, ठीक है. और फिर तुम्हारा ऑब्जर्वेशन लेके उसके बाद 80 साल तक चुतियापा चलेगा उसके देश के पॉलिटिक्स में. But Declan Quigley doesn't have a stake like that. He's saying I'm taking a completely bird's eye view of this problem, and I'm noticing that yeah, ये तो भाई हर जगह पे होता है. Nevertheless, it is sometimes said that the Hindus are fatalistic and accept their caste status because it is ordained by their karma, that is, their destiny. No doubt this is sometimes true, but equally, Hindus rebel against their lot just as frequently as any other people. The idea that all Hindus meekly accept their caste position runs contrary to a mass of evidence. Remember Sumit Guha's mention of the term called Balmiki capitalists? In modern times, तो भाई हमारा system, हमारा state system of recognizing caste reservation is running on a complete fucking lie. In modern times, the attempts by millions of untouchables to redefine themselves, whether as of Shudra status or as Christians or Buddhists, provide perhaps the most striking instances of rebellion against the idea that one's fate is written in the stars. हाँ, तो इतना भाई कर्मा पे विश्वास होता तो भाई बुद्धिस्ट कैसे बन गए, क्रिश्चियन कैसे बन गए, या फिर शूद्र नहीं रहना चाहे क्यों, एक्सेप्ट ही करना है ना, मनुस्मृति में लिखा है इसलिए, तो ये सब कैसे हो रहा है? वही मैं बोल रहा हूं कि अगर मनुस्मृति से कास्टिज्म आता है तो ये सब कॉन्ट्रडिक्शंस और काउंटर आर्ग्यूमेंट्स कहां से आ रहा है, उसका सोर्स कौन है? उसका भी तो कोई सोर्स होगा, या फिर कोई काउंटर एंटी कास्ट मनुस्मृति है. But there are many other illustrations of refusing to accept the position one was born into, which do not derive from modern conditions. The institution of hypergamy in North India, which is widespread among landowning castes, is a centuries-old competitive marriage strategy, the purpose of which is to render one's caste status as noble as possible by allying oneself to the most aristocratic families who will accept one's overtures, and distancing oneself from those among one's kin and caste fellows who might compromise one's status. Other common examples of refusing to accept one's place include the employment of genealogists to prove, quote unquote, prove that one's family has a glorious pedigree. भाई यही है हितेश रंजन चन्नल का रिसर्च, ठीक है? वो अटेस्टेशन बाबू, ब्राह्मण्स को अटेस्टेशन बाबू बना दिया था लोगों ने, ठीक है? रैंडम बनिया कास्ट, माई कास्ट, द तेली कास्ट, going around hiring Brahmins to write fake genealogies कि मैं इस देवता से डिसेंड हुआ हूं, उस राजा से डिसेंड हुआ हूं, ऐसे रैंडम genealogies, फेक genealogies बना के पेट चलाते थे Brahmins. Hashtag not all Brahmins, because all Brahmins were not in similar professions or in similar status groups. तो क्या? Other common examples of refusing to accept one's place. तो what a great way to set up an argument. See, एक ऐसा बड़ी आर्गुमेंट सेटअप हो रहा है कि उसमें से भोसरी को और 5-6 बड़ी आर्गुमेंट निकल रहे हैं, ठीक है? दिस एंटायर पैराग्राफ इज वेयर क्विगली इज ट्राइंग टू प्रूव दैट भाई लोग कर्मा भी फॉलो नहीं करते थे, कर्मा मान के मीकली हाँ हाँ अब क्या करें, हम भोसरी वाले हैं तो हम लो कास्ट में है, अब क्या करें, ऐसा भी नहीं था. उसके लिए एग्जाम्पल के बाद एग्जाम्पल दे रहा है कि भाई कोई बुद्धिस्ट बन रहा है, कोई क्रिश्चियन बन रहा है, कोई शूद्र से ऊपर जाने का कोशिश कर रहा है, और बाकी लोग तो ब्राह्मण्स हायर कर रहे हैं जीनियोलॉजी, फेक जीनियोलॉजी बना लेने के लिए. इतना विश्वास है, इतना कर्मा पे विश्वास है, और फेक जीनियोलॉजी में विश्वास कहां से आ गया? Refusing to accept one's place include the employment of genealogists to prove that one's family has a glorious pedigree, name changing in order to make it appear that one really belongs to a higher caste, and moving to another locality in order to assume a new identity, क्योंकि एक एक जगह पे एक एक कास्ट का एक एक स्टेटस होता है. The question of dharma is more complicated. Many of the problems which Western interpretations of caste get into derive from a division between the spheres of religion and power, which may be applicable to modern democratic societies, but which is meaningless in all of the complex pre-industrial, traditional, quote-unquote traditional societies, where the arena of politics is always heavily ritualized. In caste-organized communities, to refer to the arena of kingship as secular in order to contrast it with the religious domain of priests is to introduce a division which cannot be sustained. Yes. If we translate dharma as religion, it will be impossible to understand the character of any of the ritual mechanisms which are used to maintain caste divisions. देखो भाई ये आरएसएस का दल्ला के तरह बात कर रहे हैं फिर से. He even says that dharma is, if you take on the premise, if you use the premise that dharma is religion, then you'll reach all wrong fucking conclusions. The word morality much better conveys the sense of dharma. The idea that all positions carry with them certain expectations. If, as I have argued, the king's exemplary centrality provides the key to the structure of caste relations, one might expect that the dharma of the king would be particularly onerous, and so it turns out to be. Quote, That brings us to the, we are quoting some scholar called Gonda. That brings us to the real nature of Rajadharma, the teachers of which, all of them Brahmins, regarded kingship as a practical and religious necessity because they feared nothing more than chaos. Chaos किसी को नहीं चाहिए, रेगुलर डिसरप्शंस किसी को नहीं चाहिए, सबको चाहिए एक फॉसिलाइज्ड, एक इक्विलिब्रियम सोसाइटी. जैसे कि द बंगालीज, लास्ट डे वी वर डिस्कसिंग, लिसनिंग टू अनिर्बान चक्रवर्ती's views, no, the Anirban Bhattacharya's views, where he was saying that why haven't so many, why do all organizations, left-leaning organizations, theater groups in Kolkata break away? He was saying as if people have stopped being artists and film lovers and theater lovers, etc. Okay, it has decreased to a large extent, but not completely and not nearly as elsewhere, because even today people try to make different organizations, they just don't sustain. So sustain तो नहीं करता है हमारा economy के वजह से, but his argument is much more evil, that why aren't there these stable institutions where we can just go and chill for the rest of our lifetimes, where our sons, daughters, grandchildren can also become actors and actresses and stuff. That's the way his mind was working, and this is what the priests are also worried about. They don't want chaos. Rajadharma is the way a king should comport himself in order to be righteous. End quote. This is said by Deret. Gonda is saying, the monarch is responsible for rainfall. The monarch is always pure, lest his business be impeded. Then Deret is saying, the Raja looks after the spiritual needs of the kingdom by exercising his special priestly functions, without which fertility and security will be endangered. Then Raheja is saying, far from being simply a matter of secular power and force, the role of the king is ritually central to the life of the kingdom. Kings are enjoined in the textual traditions to give gifts if they wish to enjoy sovereignty. Here the work of Gonda, and to give the dana is seen as an inherent part of the royal code for conduct, Rajadharma. End quote. A second problem with conceiving of dharma as religion is that Hindus, like most other people, repeatedly contradict each other and themselves. See, with every appreciation or criticism, he's saying, just like everyone else. Hindus, like most other people, repeatedly contradict each other and themselves, in relation to core values. Core values का disagreement, contradiction क्यों है? हमारा तो है मनुस्मृति, सब पढ़ रहे. There is a particular ambiguity surrounding the relations between patrons and priests, because they are involved in an endless flow of inauspiciousness. And this can be represented in contradictory ways. The widely reported uniformity in the structure of caste relations can hardly be said to derive from adherence to a set of values in relation to priestly purity, when, as we have seen, many Hindus regard all priests as contaminated by their ritual duties. The uniformity of caste structure derives rather from a common sociological predicament, which is resolved through the institutions of kingship. This is why it is perfectly possible to call oneself a Hindu and reject caste practices. But it is generally only possible to do so when one is living outside the confines of a monarchical system, whether as a renouncer in the traditional world or as a member of a more fluid modern society. How is this anything other than an RSS manifesto, bhai? Listen to this sentence. This is 100% RSS ka dalla stuff. RSS people won't read these people. तो RSS is saying, हाँ डुमो का व्यू ही ठीक है, मगर अब हम चाहते हैं कि ये हो. डेक्लन क्विगली, निकोलस डर्क, सुमित गुहार पॉइंटिंग आउट, भाई के तुम्हारा जो व्यू है, जो तुम चाहते हो भारतवर्ष के भविष्य के लिए, भोसरी के वही हो रहा था हमेशा के लिए, कुछ अलग था ही नहीं. कब पढ़ेंगे ये सब? ट्रैड्स को तो छोड़ दो, ट्रैड्स अब अभी भी जो प्रॉपर्ली कास्टिस्ट ट्रैड्स है वो तो मादरचोद है, उनको हम क्यों समझाए. मगर जो वेल इंटेंशनड है, जो अगेंस्ट कास्टिज्म है, वो फालतू में गलत डायग्नोसिस के बाद गलत डायग्नोसिस कर करके लौड़े के पॉलिसी सपोर्ट कर रहे हैं. Imagine this paragraph from a professor at University of St. Andrews, who has nothing to do with India, RSS, etc. Not funded by BJP. He's saying this is why it is perfectly possible to call oneself a Hindu and reject caste practices, but it is generally only possible to do so when one is living outside the confines of a monarchical system, or whether as a renouncer in the traditional world or as a member of a more fluid modern society. Fluid modern society क्या है? Free market capitalism है, जहां पे अलग तरह का caste status groups तो होगा ही वैसे. What a nice paper. This is the end of the paper. ये इतना इतना जल्दी हो जाएगा पता नहीं था. That makes sense. I've been reading. Acha, dharma is religion is the biggest blunder committed by the Indian elite. Yes. Which AI agents are the best for academia? The one created by that Indian guy who recently met Narendra Modi. No, that guy. I forgot what it's called. Dada, did you post the Vivek Ramaswamy post 24 minutes ago while you were streaming? AI agents. No, I did it before starting the live stream because हमारा stream का तो 1 घंटा हो गया. My Sangha would have lasted from 1,000 years, but now that women are included, it would last 500 years to see. Oh my God. Buddha was from Ishvaku lineage, same as Sri Ram. And he was from a purely endogamous tribe. Before they entered the caste system, they entered the caste system consciously. We want to be part of what the fun party all are having here, but we are already endogamous. Irfan Habib says this, points this out. Sociology has been used as a weapon against Hindu society and culture. Yes, and therefore we have been pissed off with sociology, whereas there are these kinds of people in sociology as well. This is social anthropology, to be precise. Some mega minded. Okay. By the way, some Brahmins are included into this. OBC. अब incentive ये है. Perplexity. Yes. Perplexity is the best one for discussing academic stuff. एक दिन ऐसा हुआ था, मेरा जो AI का दोस्त है शायोक पॉल, who was the first podcast guest ever in my channel, who is a world famous AI scientist. He has about 1100 citations on Google Scholar. Okay, इतना पेपर लिखता है बेंचोद. तो उसने एक दिन मेरे को रेकमेंड किया था, क्योंकि एक दिन मैं जब डॉक्टर शोमोदे का एक पेपर डिस्कस करने बैठा था, नहीं शोमोदे का नहीं, रिचर्ड ईटन का एक दिन मैं पेपर डिस्कस करने बैठ रहा था, ठीक है. तो आई वॉज गोइंग थ्रू द पेपर ओनली इन द कंक्लूजन एंड द एब्स्ट्रैक्ट, बिकॉज आई वॉज नॉट श्योर एट ऑल व्हाट द पेपर इज अबाउट. तो उसके बेसिस पे ही तो थोड़ा थंबनेल में भी एक इंडिकेशन मैसेज थोड़ा दूंगा ना. तो अब कंक्लूजन पढ़ के लग रहा है कि ये तो एकदम पूरा का पूरा कॉमी आर्ग्यूमेंट है, तो ये मुझे मिस्ट्री सोशियोलॉजिस्ट क्यों रेकमेंड करेगा. तो then I called up Mr. Sociologist. At that very moment, 20 minutes before the live stream, he was not picking up the phone. Then I asked, then at that moment, my friend says that, no, try Perplexity for this. And Perplexity explains to me it in the correct way. And then I understood the paper. मैंने उसको सिर्फ कंक्लूजन और एब्स्ट्रैक्ट कॉपी पेस्ट कर दिया, उसने मुझे एक्सप्लेन कर दिया प्रॉपर्ली. मेरे दिमाग में घुस नहीं रहा था, मैंने पूरा इंटरप्रिटेशन गलत किया था उस पेपर का. और एनीवे, तो बाय द वे मिस्टर सोशियोलॉजिस्ट ने बोला है रिमाइंड करने को कि ही हैड प्रेडिक्टेड दैट विवेक वुड रन फॉर ओहायो गवर्नर. दादा ब्रिंग शायक पॉल अगेन. हाँ, एक दिन करना पड़ेगा. आज भी वो मेरे घर पे आएगा. लेट्स सी. अरे उसको घर पे उसके साथ करने में कोई मजा नहीं है, क्योंकि उसके पास अच्छा इक्विपमेंट नहीं है. और यहाँ पे आएगा तो एक माइक से करना पड़ेगा. एक और मेरे पास अगर माइक होता तो हो जाता. लेट्स सी if we can try today, but other friends are also coming. Let's see. হিন্দু বা সনাতনী হলো ওয়ে অফ লাইফ, জীবনকে অনেক ভাবে বাঁচতে শেখায় অন্য ধর্মে. Yes. Dada, I asked yesterday, is Modi doing centralization or formalization? I have no idea what the differences are. Let's see what formalization means. Oh, formalization, yeah. Bringing them into, but that's only in terms of different professions. Some professions are being introduced into the like mainstream of the financial world. Centralization is a different matter because in terms of bureaucracy and accumulating power. You can ask Konrad Elst for podcast. Konrad Elst, so even bigger problem. I have never understood 60% of what he says in any of his podcasts because of course his Belgian pronunciation and then his horrible equipment at home. It's difficult to defeat Mike Devine. Let's see. We are all going to do foreign interference and campaign hard for him. We need Vivek there because he's a nice ambassador for Hinduism and also because he's a general force for good things in humanity. He's good for the world. Okay then. Thank you for joining the live stream, guys. Bye-bye. Good night.
सहस्रवरूढं महाभीमं घोराद्रष्टाम्बरप्रदं हस्य युक्तं त्रिनेत्रं च कपालकर्णिकाकरां मुक्तकेशीं ललज्ज्यं पिबन्तीं रुधिरं चतुर्बाहु समायुक्तं वराभयकरं स्मरेत् चतुर्बाहु समायुक्तं वराभयकरं स्मरेत्